the hour. And our first speaker tonight, she's absolutely awesome. She's from Cape Town, and at the moment she's busy with her PhD in urban ecology. And she's going to talk to us about strategies for building urban habitats for biodiversity. So I hand it over to Peta Brom.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you very much. So I'm going to just give it the byline that it's a celebration of ordinary biodiversity in the city. There's a little bit of a misconception that we only need to protect the endangered species, but our global declines are indicating that we need to do a little bit more than that. And yeah, so let's just see if I can click through. When you speak to a traditional conservation biologist, they'll tell you that cities are actually one of the greatest threats to biodiversity. They are fragmented, hostile, and frequently disturbed. But they're distinctly different in community. In community structure, the species that we find within the city from agricultural and natural areas. And although they are different and we're finding different things, the biodiversity tends to be at quite similar levels, with the main difference that we find more rare species in natural areas, although that doesn't exclude cities from having critically endangered species in them. Broadly, the response to urban environments is that you have urban adapters, urban avoiders, and urban exploiters. So the urban avoiders will not go into a city and they'll extirpate quite quickly in an urban environment. And the urban exploiters are the guys that we associate very closely with cities who take advantage of the resources that are there, like your pigeons. The guys in the middle category, the urban adapters, are the ones that I'm more interested in, because they'll adapt their behavior to cities. They'll start moving around at different times to the natural environment. They'll start to use different resources to what we observe in natural environments as well. But they also are a little bit more sensitive. They sometimes are generalists. So when we look at the global trends of bees, the smaller bodied bees that are ground nesters tend to struggle a bit in the city, but we can do things to support them. So I'm interested in the ways that we can support this particular group and increase the biodiversity with them. And one of the earlier studies done in the 90s found that biodiversity peaked in the middle of the gradient in the suburban and residential areas, and not necessarily at the periphery of the city, as one might expect. So this evening, I'm going to present 3 ideas for biodiverse cities. The first is to consciously foster connectivity through nature corridors and stepping stones. These are how do we combat fragmentation within the city. The second is to manage the succession and tree canopy. And the third is to landscape for stormwater management. We use the acronyms WSUD, SUDS, and LIDS to describe the kinds of technological interventions that we put in place to landscape with stormwater. So in building connectivity to combat fragmentation, you can, if you have 2 larger fragments or natural areas, one might want to find a way to have a corridor that animals can move along between the 2 spaces, that would be linear and completely connected. But it doesn't necessarily have to take this form. It can also be in patches or stepping stones that provide stopover points and resting points within the rest of the habitat. So these would be areas similar to the larger fragments, but at smaller scales throughout the urban fabric. And a group of us are so enthralled and interested in this idea that we've they're all different NGOs are working in different spaces towards the same goal of generating corridors and creating connectivity within the city. Ngunu is focused on sunbirds. They do plant out gardens with aloes and leonotis and ericaceae to provide stopovers for sunbirds. Green Pop has been involved in, has been doing pioneer gardens and fenbos for the future garden. So we got together and said, how do we as BDI, Community, Famous Life, Green Pop and Ngunu expand and extend our capacity by cooperating with each other? So we're focusing particularly on pollinators, and BDI is providing monitoring support, and Famous Life is providing some expertise in plants and rehabilitation. And I just want to mention that we take small interventions that are scalable across the landscape. That's an idea. So here is one focus area is in schools. And I just did a quick mapping exercise in Kylie on the Cape Flats. All the little maroon marker points are where schools are. So you can see that there's quite a lot. If you were to have a famous garden in every single school, it would start to have quite a significant impact. So Ngunu and Green Pop are focusing specifically on schools. They have a famous for the future program. Ngunu goes, connects us with bird watching activities with the children, as well as a follow-on to monitor the change in birds as a result of their intervention. And Green Pop is monitoring the insects, the pollinators, and arthropods. So Community, they had a pioneer garden project. They started by putting pioneer species in with a succession plan to introduce increasingly rare and threatened species into them. They work in public open space, road verges, and parks. And what they do is they recruit citizens and give them workshops in propagation. And they set up home nurseries and outsource. So volunteers have home growing programs, and then they have planting days where they plant out their gardens. I just wanted to play for you this video. It's going to play now of the Born to Heal Walking Ladies Peace Garden. If you're familiar with the area, it's highly got a very big problem with gangsterism and crime. So it can have a social impact and an educational impact, as well as a positive environmental impact. But you know, the last 2 to 3 years, I've been monitoring, sampling insects around the city of Cape Town in all the parks and road verges. I think I visited more than 120 different parks and sampled there. And I also observed the floral abundance. I took records of the species that I was seeing, and I noticed that there's a tremendous diversity of indigenous geophytes and annuals that are coming up in the park lawns every year. And halfway through the season, the tractors and the mowers would come around. And a lot of people have gotten quite upset about this. So I started thinking perhaps there's a strategic way that we can approach this that isn't just standing up and getting angry every single time we see flowers getting mowed down, but looks at identifying where particular areas are and different strategies for different conditions. So these are just some of the species that I documented. These are all my own photographs. It's not exhaustive at all. Before I carry on, I just want to highlight why mowing is actually necessary, and it is hugely necessary. It's in these spaces for weed control. It maintains the functional utility of a park for recreation. That's its purpose in the city. It ensures visibility and space to pull off at the roadside when it's in the road verges. So it's a safety measure as well. It prevents dry biomass buildup and consequently fires, the spread of fires. And a well-maintained area promotes legitimate usage and helps to prevent crime. So it's really necessary and an important part of our spatial management within the city. But this little bee says, I just woke up, don't mow me down. So these are I identified 3 different groups or 3 different typologies of urban lawn in these spaces. The first has these very common species that seem to be have strategies for surviving in these spaces. They hold their flowers and their seeds lower down, and there's backups for when the top flower is removed. And they're there in almost all the parks that I visited. You'll get at least 1, normally 2 or 3 of these species. Group 2 are these geophytes and annuals that have processes that are definitely disrupted by mowing. You chop them down and the flower is gone, and the plant suffers underneath, or the seeds are just destroyed. So I'm trying to figure out at the moment, I'm busy monitoring exactly how long they're in seed for, to try to be able to give an indication of how long we would need to suspend mowing in order to be able to conserve these species of flowers or to promote their growth within the city. And then the third group are require protection or some sort of alternative landscaping intervention and management. And these are relatively rare in the city. They're not nearly as common in these spaces. And what at the moment I've put out a call on social media and asked people to document and note the flowers coming up in their lawns this spring, and to identify where those locations are. And you can use whatever platform is comfortable for you, whether it's Casabio or Candide or iNaturalist. They're all useful. And then the City of Cape Town has asked people to send motivations for grass cutting suspension to inquiries at capetown.gov.za. So I'm also trying to curate a list as well. This is a picture of a lawn that has some candy stripe oxalis growing in it. It's in Arduin Gardens. They deserve a special shout out because they've taken up the banner of trying to garden their lawns for floral diversity. So they've identified a couple of lawns with strategies where they're starting to introduce some of the species to be able to showcase that it is a bit of a botanical garden, so people will be able to actually see what we've got coming up there, which is really, really lovely. So my proposed strategy is firstly to identify areas that contain group 2 and 3 flowering plants with the help of citizen scientists. Secondly, to communicate these areas to city officials and develop some sort of a method for marking them out or communicating them to parks contractors, because I think one of the big issues that we're facing is that the tender documentation doesn't instruct them not to mow in those areas, and then there's no legibility in the landscape when they go there, and if they don't mow and complete their job, they might not get paid, so they just go and they have to do their job. And then the third thing is that, and which I hope to do, and I'm starting to talk to the Brom Association, Brom Park, and hopefully others also get on board, is to do seed stewardship, where we start collecting seeds and germinating them and then replanting them in appropriate spaces, either in the park or in the neighborhood around the area. So the second strategy for urban biodiversity I wanted to share with you is planning for tree succession. It's a little bit controversial. I've seen some people writing articles about it not being appropriate as a climate change response in parts of Africa. But I do want to say that in the urban environment, it is a way of protecting us against urban heat island effect. And in a hotter climate, they can be a way of mitigating heat exhaustion and helping to cool the city down. So this particular tree is in a garden not too far away from Les's house in Rondebosch. It's got that's a sunbird nest there that I've circled. It's also regularly visited by bats. And Karen Eichen of us in Australia as an urban ecologist, he says that if we cut down a mature tree, the biodiversity and biomass that it contributes to the city cannot be replaced simply by planting saplings out. So we need to actually have trees and a tree canopy at various stages of development. And the other issue that they found is that all their trees, when they did an inventory, are of a similar age. So they're all going to die at the same time. And they need to start planning for it. This is the sunbird in its maiden flight, the baby, so it was a successful nest. And I've mentioned that. And very few of Melbourne's trees are also likely to be able to survive. They tested in a laboratory under a hotter climate, and they're going to lose a lot of them. City of Cape Town has taken this up. There's a global drive to document the tree canopy, and this is the mapping exercise that City of Cape Town's taken up. So from grassroots to satellite, and it's a first step towards inventory of trees by species and age. Now, lastly, I'm going to tell you about my rain garden that I put in place. I wanted to have a pond for some frogs and some dragonflies, and it needed to be completely rainwater dependent. I didn't want to be topping it up with any municipal water. So there I looked at all the habitat requirements for frogs and dragonflies, and they need emergent vegetation and dense undergrowth in the garden around, and some border plants and things. And yeah, so that the spin-off of doing interventions like this, where you catch your rainwater, is it slows the progress of water down to the local river. In their great wisdom, the civil engineers of the 60s and 70s were trying to remove stormwater from the city as quickly as possible and prevent flooding, and that was their primary objective. And they canalized a lot of the rivers, and this creates peak stormwater flows that disrupt the functioning of our local rivers and our ecology. So one of the ways that we can actually restore our local rivers is by integrating stormwater management into the landscape within our own gardens. And yeah, the big elephant in the room was how long before the mosquitoes are gone, or won't this create swarms and swarms of mosquitoes? And so I built this little rain garden with the intention of anecdotally answering that question. But before I go there, let me just give you a map. This is my house, the one with the blue dots in it. The yellow square is the area that I can collect rainwater from, and the arrow indicates where the gully goes along the edge of the boundary of my property. So I decided to disrupt the flow of the stormwater at the star and dig a big hole there. I created a permanent area that I lined with plastic, and then an overflow area that I lined with geofabric and stone chip. And then I said to myself, okay, in the driest month of the year, how much rainfall do we have, and how big can my permanent pond be? I figured I'd like it to refill twice during the course of that month, This precipitation data is a little bit generous. I relied originally on other data that said that we had only about 10 millimeters in February. And so I figured that in February, in the month of February, I'd get 700 liters of water off that 70 square meters of roof. And then I looked at a 10-year data, 10-year typical year for the weather data. And I noticed that the shortest interval between storm events was 10 days. So I thought, okay, great. I'm likely to get at least 2 storm events in the month of February, and that's the amount of water that I can collect. So I sized my permanent area at half of that, at 350 liters, which is about the size of a large bath. So on the succession process, first the mosquitoes came, of course, followed by dragonflies, who ate all the mosquitoes. And then 6 months later, I found these Exuviae. So these are the exoskeletons that are left behind by dragonfly nymphs when they try and metamorphose into adult dragonflies. And yeah, I got to find them all on the day that they emerged from my little wetland, and that means that they were successfully breeding in my pond. It was 2 years before the arrival of the first frog, and that happened this last autumn. And I've got a little video for you again. Let's see. And you can hear my very first clicking stream frog calling. Now, the children have tried very hard to find this frog, and they were totally unsuccessful. Every time you get anywhere close to it, it goes very quiet, and that's very thick in there. So that's all I have for you. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Peta. That was really, really cool. I think this topic that you are studying at the moment is so fascinating. It's something I find extremely exciting. And I've been reading more and more articles. You know, it's like conservation is really, it's something that starts at home. And it's something that we can all start in our gardens to welcome wildlife back into our lives. And to make our urban spaces more wildlife friendly.
I'm seeing the questions now.
Yeah, there's one question. Yeah.
I've read about the DMOS system. I'm not sure what else to say about it. Steve, do you wanna just, what are your questions?
Just expand a little bit on that. It's been going here for many, many years. I mean, I've lived in Durban 15 years, and it was already up and running at least 5 years before that. And you know, we're very lucky because we've got a lot of natural forest refugia within our suburbs, and we've got a nature reserve just down the road from here, which actually wasn't natural forest until about 15 years ago, when they cleared out all the gum trees and planted a whole load of indigenous plants. And it's now a contiguous forest with the big nature reserve in the area is Cranskloof Nature Reserve. And what the local conservancies movements have been doing, and I think it's important to say that they did a brilliant job, is they started these indigenous gardens shows. And all the local nurseries started selling locally indigenous plants, which is the important part. It's no good planting Cape Town stuff in Durban, nothing will eat it. And if you use that strategy together with getting rid of pesticides and avoiding using weed killers, you actually can, well, we call it the Rewild Your Garden movement. There's a few people actually pushing that. Duncan Butcher's one of them, and we've got Andrea Abbott and a lady called Marlies Craig. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. And she's giving quite a few talks on this, and it's great to see what you're doing in Cape Town. It'd be wonderful actually to get Marlies or Andrea, one of the local people, doing a similar thing, to give a talk like this, because you talk about refugia and stepping stones and corridors. That's exactly what DMOS is about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good. Well done.
Okay, I saw somebody asked about what kind of mower. The city's using tractors mostly. So the tractors do seem to mow a little bit higher than the weed eaters. So that does spare a lot of those flowers, those close growing flowers that I mentioned. Okay, let me see what else I've got here. I think that was the only.
This one.
Then following, he will soon be implementing an urban ecology project in Nairobi. Fantastic. Please connect me.
Yeah, so we can afterwards. Mitazu will share your email and your contact details with everyone else if they've got more questions or things that they want to know about. But thank you, Peta. That was so cool, like really awesome presentation.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the next one, which Rion and Eugene are going to present on